Here we go. So we're continuing our discussion of the Heart Sutra, our exploration of the Heart Sutra. And broadly, there are two really important points that we keep coming back to. The first is that experience is vivid, it's compelling, the way it feels to be alive, what's happening in your life, what you're doing, seeing, feeling, thinking, the emotions you have, the physical sensations. They're very compelling. It feels they grab your attention. That's how it feels to be you. And while it feels that way, it is not a solid, permanent state of things. It's not real in the sense that it's solid and permanent. So, as we've said so many times in Community Refuge, it flows by, changing moment by moment like a river. It's more of a river than a rock. It's more liquid and fluid and changing than a solid, unchanging thing. That's part of what that more like a river than a rock points at. So that's the first insight. And please note, we're not saying it doesn't feel vivid, it doesn't feel like what's happening to you and your story about you is real. It's just that's not exactly how it is. It's more like a river. The second thing that is being pointed at in the Heart Sutra is a direct experience of or a direct understanding of how things truly are. If it's not a rock, what does it feel like to be this river? What is that like? And the insight or the experience that takes you there is called prajna. So uh, Avalokiteshvara answering his questioner, Shariputra, this is how a son or daughter, a child of noble family, practices the pathway of transcendent prajna, the prajna paramita, the prajna that takes you from the side of the river. If this side is the confused side and the other side is the awakened side, this is what takes you, the prajna that takes you from confusion to being awake or to being enlightened. Prajna paramita. This is how you practice it. And we've gone through a lot of the first part, which is it's not a rock, it's not a rock, it's not a rock, over and over. There is a teaching in the foundation teachings about how ego forms. That's the teaching on the five skandhas. And we've translated those. It's five movements in the process of ego, feeling separate, having a reaction, giving that reaction a name or that experience a name, telling a story about it, and then you're the storyteller. And it feels like that's you, that's me, it's happening to me. I like chocolate, I don't like whatever you don't like, right? Um, right now this room I'm in is a little cool. It feels cool. It's not hot, right? I'm the one who's feeling the cool, right? So we're all the way up to consciousness. And he goes, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. But over and over, we've been talking about the experiences feel very real. And yet they are flowing by and changeable moment by moment, more like a river than a rock. And then we took it to um, the experience of no birth and no cessation. And the idea being, we think that this self, this ego, my story about me, your story about you, that's who I really am. And the Great Way teachings invite you to look and find that I that you think is really there. And you can look and look and look, and you will not find anything that is an existent reality. It's an experience, it's very vivid, but it doesn't have a place in the body, it doesn't have a shape, it doesn't have a color, right? Uh, you can't find when that sense of I begins. You're sort of born with it, right? This is happening to me, and it doesn't go. If it doesn't have a beginning, it can't end, right? So you sort of begin to get the idea that, oh, this I, this sense of a permanent me, that this really vivid experience is happening to, it's not exactly that way. It doesn't have a birth, so it can't end. No birth, no cessation. And we looked at suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering. If there is no I, which is what we were just talking about, then who is it that's suffering? So we only suffer to the doesn't mean that pain doesn't happen, struggle doesn't happen, the Buddha's first truth, life is a rough ride, that's still equally valid. But the suffering, which is, oh, it's happening to me, becomes a little bit more transparent when you realize that that me is something you made up. And so I invite you to think about something that was really painful when you were 9 years old. And, if you have childhood trauma, I'm not inviting you to think about that. I'm thinking more of, oh, I really wanted a bike at Christmas. I did, actually. I wanted a bicycle. I had this hand me down bike, and it was sort of rickety, and I wanted a new bicycle. I didn't get it. That was suffering. I didn't get what I wanted. And yet, here I am, almost 61 years later, and until I needed an example, I haven't thought about that in many, many decades. The I that wanted it is no longer here to suffer. But when I was 9, it was very compelling. So a lot of our suffering is like that. Without the I, it loses its energy, its gravity, its stickiness for us. Right? So now we're at really the second movement. So we've looked at, there is, it's not a rock. It feels like a rock, but it's not. It's not the rock of the skandhas. It's not the rock of suffering. It's not the rock of a separate self. And now we begin to talk about no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. And this week, as I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about the difference between wisdom, as I believe it's being used in the Heart Sutra. And it's dangerous when you translate a word and like in what context were they using that? What did it mean, right? Because you could say what I'm about to say next is wisdom, but it would get too verbally confusing. So I'm going to stick with the word that's in the Heart Sutra, prajna, right? So wisdom versus prajna. And remember, the conversations happening in front of some very advanced practitioners, people who have practiced and followed the Buddha. They are the followers of the Buddha. They are the best meditators. This is the elite of the meditation world, sitting around the Buddha, like with the Buddha and his two senior students, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra, are having this discussion. And many of those elite meditators were very proud of their understanding. They had studied, philosophized, psychologized. They understood how the skandhas worked, how the chain of causes produced reality. They had a lot of understanding. But that learning, that intellectual knowledge, did not take them across the river. They're still here holding on to the knowledge. Still feels a little bit like a rock. And so Avalokiteshvara says, no wisdom. It's like, it's not about the intellect. This isn't an idea, what we're talking about. It's not a concept. It's really, really difficult. In fact, you might say impossible to express it in words. I think you've all heard the story of there's the teacher and the student. This has so many versions. And the teacher points a finger at the moon. They're outside at night. And he goes, look, the moon. And the student looks at the pointing finger, and the teacher goes, not the finger, that's just the pointer. The words are like the pointer. The experience of moon is out there, right? It's direct. You look and see, right? And let the moon fill your eyes, fill your heart, fill you, right? It's a very direct experiential thing. So the question we had at the very beginning, and I loved your answers, they were really wonderful, of what's a word that goes with wisdom? And, clarity, clear sky, heart, mind, tenderness. I liked mistakes, because mistakes often take you closer to the directness. You go, oh, it's not that. I'll keep looking. Oh, it's not that. I'll keep looking. So in our meditation practice, I could say, the Prajnaparamita is not meditation. Meditation is wonderful, and it's something we all do, and it strengthens us, and it helps us, it gives us understanding and energy for the journey. But at some point, the Heart Sutra is pointing to, there is this experience that is incredibly direct. It is an experience, it's not an idea. So I'm going to invite you to pick something up. I'm going to pick up the little bells that I use to ring. These have a Tibetan name that say ringy things, tingsha, right? And I'm just feeling them. So pick something up in your hands, right? And let yourself feel. Don't think about it. It's not like I'm thinking about what it feels. As soon as you start telling yourself a story, just let yourself begin to, like, the directness of your fingers touching something. Right? I can feel the difference between the leather thong that connects these two little bells, right, to the metal, and the smoothness of the inside versus the outside has an embossment, has a mantra on it. It's like, oh, it's very direct. Or here's another one, right? You're looking at the screen, and we're having this connection mediated across a, internet-based streaming video call, right? And you're seeing something, right? And then that's coming towards you, right? I'm seeing what's on this side, right? So it's like, oh, it's very direct. I don't have to think, now I want my eyes to see, right? Now I'm going to have them process. It's just a very direct, immediate event. And so there is an understanding, and I'm using those two examples of directness, the directness of touching or the directness of seeing. It could be hearing, it could be any directness, right? There is I'm going to call it an understanding that opens up as you meditate and practice the exercises that tenderize your heart, that connect you with others, that connects you to the flow, the dynamic energy of that, what we say, it's more like a river. It connects you to that. And that direct experience, which might be described as open, empty, full. It's not the words, not the finger pointing at the moon. Those are just a description, right? It's trying to be a helpful description. If the words get in the way, let them go. But there is some kind of direct experience of open, empty, full, warm, and awake. And when you're there, it takes you across the river. So when Avalokiteshvara says no wisdom, he's not saying there's not anything to experience. He's saying, oh, it's not about building up ideas. Ideas are beautiful, but they won't take you across the river. It's not even about the path of meditation. Oh, I do an hour a day or 2 hours a day or 3 times a week or whatever like, those are all good. That's not going to take you across the river. It's not something that you gain that's different from what's already here. The possibility of open, empty, full is constantly happening. It's like the river. And it's, can we get out of the way and allow ourselves to directly experience that? Because if you do, you will find yourself on the awake, alert, compassionate side of that river of experience. So that's what I have to share. In this way, the Heart Sutra is very helpful. We've been saying a lot of no, 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 no rock, no rock, no rock, no rock. And now it's like, but there is that other side, right? And that's very hopeful. And you can be there directly. So with that, I'm going to pause the talk, and I'd love to hear what you think or what you'd like to share.